Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, did you know there's a skill many men never learn that ends up seriously limiting your professional success and satisfaction in your love and sex life? I put together a free guide to explain this unknown skill and give you exactly what you need to use it today. Get it by heading over to ShanaJamesCoaching.com or text the word ALIVE, A-L-I-V-E, to 44144. That's 44144. You'll also get access to Man Alive outtakes, raw footage, and bonus videos you can only get there. Welcome to this episode of Man Alive. What an awesome day this is. I get to have a colleague and dear friend, Neil Sattin, who is a healer, a writer, a couples coach, and also the host of the popular podcast Relationship Alive. Weren't you just named the best podcast in the Portland area? Something like that?
I was, yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so in the Relationship Alive podcast, Neil talks to the world's experts on the topic of how to thrive in long-term relationships. And a little glimmer of what we're going to talk about today, we are going to talk about the topic of sex, but in a probably unexpected, I'll just say. There's going to be an unexpected twist here. So I'll finish introducing Neil and then we'll dive in. Neil's podcast is a source of inspiration and growth for people in relationship and also for therapists who are learning how to deepen their work with couples. So Neil and his partner Chloe also created the newloveparadigm.com and a course, a 7-week online course called Thriving Intimacy. And it synthesizes the best current wisdom on deepening intimacy in relationship. And part of what I love about Neil is, he's been through traditional courses of therapy and all of that, but also, really has a lot of background in transformational work and energy healing even. And, you cover the gamut. And so I really trust you with people. I trust you with couples. And I love what you're doing in the world.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, you guys have also produced 21 Days to Deeper Intimacy for the Daily Om website. And then, I've gotten to meet your beautiful children. And so he's also a father and plays music and trains dogs and, a man who does it all, let's say. But I really, really appreciate your passion and hunger for understanding relationship. I think we share that. Like, how do we make this work? Neil and I went through divorce around the same time and, have been on this journey together. So thank you so much for joining us today.
It's really awesome to be here with you, Shana.
Good. So we are going to talk about sex. And as I said, this unexpected twist. We're going to talk about saying no to sex and how that actually could be helpful in a relationship. And I would say in dating as well. And, I would say this is a less popular or a less desired approach. We're not going to say never have sex. But yeah, let's start off the conversation, Neil, in why did you propose that we have a conversation about saying no to sex, and what is this really about for you?
Sure. Well, the reason why I think it's so important is because for so many people, it's the desire to have sex that drives a lot of our dating and relationship life. And it's also problems around sexual desire, like different levels of libido or how often you want to have sex. That is one of the things that drives couples apart. So, so issues of sex and whether or not it has power over us, I think are really huge when it comes to not only being able to be discerning when you're choosing a lover or a mate, And then on top of that, when you're in relationship, so much can be clouded by that, frequency of
on
sex.
The brain.
Exactly.
Okay, wait. So before we even go farther into this, can you give me a little sense of when you say no to sex? Let's get more specific. Like,
Great.
Are you saying, right, how often do you say no to sex? Or is it just more of a, I don't think it's more of a blanket attitude towards sex.
Right. Always say no. No, I'm just kidding. No, this is not a just say no. That's not what we're talking about. But there's the power in saying no. So there's no prescription in a sense of like, if you're meeting someone, you shouldn't have sex with them. That's not what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Although I think that can be really helpful, because once you're having sex, your judgment gets totally clouded by dopamine and oxytocin and all of those things that just are part of our neurochemical cocktail.
Yes.
So there are good reasons for at least tempering your level of physical intimacy with new people as you meet them. But the purpose of saying no to sex is actually it comes from two places. One, I was inspired by some of the research that John Gottman did around how in couples, when either partner feels free to say no to sex, and not only free to say no, but when you say no, it is welcomed by your partner. It's a positive thing, as opposed to being neutral, or what it is for most people is negative.
Right.
If it's neutral or negative, then saying no becomes detrimental. You have less sex.
Right.
But if both people are free to say no, and it's a positive, when either one of them says no, those couples have more sex.
Okay. And so we can talk about couples, and also even in the dating, maybe, as you talk, I can kind of relate it to dating also. But right, as you said that, I was thinking that, okay, so if you're saying no to sex and it's a positive, give us more of a sense of, what is the positive, or how can it be taken as a positive for someone who feels rejected. I mean, I know that feeling of, someone saying no to sex, and then we can go into this whole shame spin of what's wrong with me, or for a woman, am I not beautiful enough or sexy enough? And for a man, am I not strong enough or powerful enough or sexy enough? And right. So how do you turn it into a positive then?
Yeah. So, and this actually does relate to dating as well as relationship. Because when we proceed with the goal in mind, so the goal of, let's say, having sex, like that's somehow intimacy, is intercourse, some form of intercourse, then it's easy to miss everything that happens before intercourse happens.
Right. Now, this is actually pinging something for me that's interesting also, which is our definition of sex, right? So now, are you using the definition of sex equals intercourse? Or, sometimes what I work with men is that sex can be anything from eye gazing to breathing together to just, that the energetic feeling between two people. So what's your definition of sex?
Yeah. Okay. So hearing you explain it like that, what I'm interested in is fostering the eye gazing, the energetic connection, the nuances of how you caress each other, how you explore each other.
Yeah.
So I think I'm saying no primarily around intercourse.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. And there's something particular about that, I think, especially in terms of heterosexual relationships.
I was just going to say that, right? That becomes so common or so typical.
Yeah, where the pacing of sex can often be more oriented toward male sexuality. And that often means that sex is happening before the woman is actually ready to have intercourse.
Interesting.
So part of saying no is actually allowing for both kinds of sexuality. And, we're being a little bit of we're doing generalizations here.
Right.
But it's like, if you could generalize, like, male sexuality is generally pretty quick to ignite and often quick to extinguish.
I've heard a teacher talk about how there are maybe, they call them gates or something, like 7 gates for both a man and a woman to open up, or no, something like maybe 3 gates for a man to open up and they open simultaneously. And for a woman, it's 7 and they open sequentially or something, which again, there are some women who turn on a lot faster, and there are men who turn on a lot slower. And I think as I get older and as I work with more men who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, there's so much more of a heart and vulnerability and emotional connection that a lot of men are starting to find necessary to even get turned on. And a lot of men come to me thinking, there's something wrong. And yet we get to really look at, oh, this is a different kind of sex that you're wanting to have, where there is this kind of actual intimacy. So, right, I love what you're talking about really helping to, helping 2 people to engage in all of these other ways of creating intimacy.
Yeah. And when you actually go the step of taking sex off the table, and you might even make that explicit, like, I'm not going to sleep with you, or if you're in a relationship, it could be, let's not, or even in dating, like if things are going really well, it could be, let's not for a week or 2, or, whatever it is, 3 to 5 dates. And I'm just thinking of those, like,
shortened it.
those funny answers on, like, OkCupid is what I'm thinking of, like, where people are like, what is the average number of time it takes you to have sex?
Right.
Never. So if you can take it off the table so that neither person feels the pressure of wondering, is it going to happen?
Yes.
Because I think it's in that wondering that's often where the miscommunication is happening, or really where the communication isn't happening.
Right. And there can be this anxiety and it, it can create this polarization of, I'm on one team, you're on the other. I'm trying to get something from you, or I want something from you, right? And I don't know how to make it happen. And I don't know if you're going to be okay with the fact that I want it. So many men I've worked with, it's like, I shouldn't want it, or maybe there's something bad about me for wanting it this much. And wait, how do we actually make that okay? Whatever amount of sex we desire, there's nothing innately wrong with it. But then I think it's, how do we channel that to create more love and connection and intimacy? And I know you brought the book, what is it, Karezza, or the practice of Karezza, to my attention.
Yeah.
And a couple things are coming to mind, right? I'm going to hear a little bit about that, if that plays in for you. And also, a lot of times I work with men around slowing down that actually ends up speeding things up, or slowing down that creates more intimacy so that a woman's body can open. And this tends to happen to me when I get in these conversations. I get so excited, and there's all these different pathways that we could follow. So you tell me where you want to go next. Which one?
Yeah, well, there's so much there. It can be related to Karezza, to that approach, which loosely I define as non-orgasmic sex, or sex that isn't about having climax orgasms, because even saying non-orgasmic isn't really accurate.
Right.
That's another great example of how saying no to something brings out nuances that you might not experience otherwise.
Right, that sex or in intercourse, there's, non-orgasmic, or the different kinds of orgasm that are even possible in sex, versus there's just this one thing possible.
Yeah, exactly. And so once you say no to having a climax, let's say, then you start to open up to all these other things that you can say yes to.
Yes.
The subtleties of feeling, and as like tantra masters will say, like the different kinds of orgasms that you can actually have that aren't about big peak climax and then what comes after.
Right. The drop, the chemical drop and kind of emotional drop that can happen after that.
Right. And that can be potent for either men or women, but particularly for men, it can be huge.
Yeah.
And then you just get into like sort of self-medicating through like orgasms and dopamine, and you're on like an addictive cycle.
Right. Right.
And who wants to be trapped in that? Like, I don't.
Right.
Yeah. So, so when you say no to sex, period,
intercourse, we're talking about here.
Intercourse.
Okay.
Then again, that opens you up to what happens when I'm not trying to get my partner somewhere.
Right.
You mentioned earlier that wondering, like, are they there? Are they gonna give me what I want? Like how it can set up that adversarial role.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, like when it's not on the table, things suddenly become way more collaborative.
Yes.
And, just with this one little thing, I've had couples who like for whom sex has been a problem, like they do this and now they're like fighting to have sex.
Right.
And honestly, when they come to me to a session and they're like, sorry, we had sex, like we couldn't live up to the,
we broke
I'm
the
like,
rules.
I'm like, well, that's okay.
Yeah.
As long as, they haven't fallen into some sort of shame cycle about how they messed up,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, and it's interesting. And I like acknowledging that ultimately the goal is not about, some Puritan way to be. It's not actually about not having sex, but it's about, I think, being at choice. And there is, such a world of subtleties, like you said, that can open up where, I've done exercises in workshops where I've been the coach for men, and we've sat across from each other and said colors of the rainbow or numbers, trying to say them at the same time or something. And where the amount of heat that can build, through speaking or looking into someone's eyes or, touching finger to finger can actually be electric and so exciting. And yet, like you said, if you go right for intercourse, all of that seems to just disappear.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are two things that jumped out at me from that. One is I was thinking about how often in intercourse, like there's all this buildup of connection, and really it can be intense, amazing, transcendent feelings that then, particularly once climax orgasms happen, it can just go away. Yeah. And sometimes it's drastic, other times it's more subtle, but it's at least like the feeling of turn on or the feeling of magnetism that was driving intercourse, just like where to go. Whereas when you're focused on the journey, like now you're actually fully exploring all of those ways in which you are magnetically attracted to your partner. And it's so exciting, like what you were describing, when you figure out like, oh my God, like just looking into each other's eyes and breathing is like electric.
Yeah.
You may not discover that otherwise. Right. The other thing that popped into my head that's so important about this is, and you mentioned this earlier on, it's the feelings of rejection that come up when a no is said. Those are so important to surface and to address for yourself.
Yes.
So that you can get to an empowered place of choice where where the purpose of sex isn't to like reinforce that you're somehow okay or acceptable, where you're sourcing that sense of yourself in your partner.
Yes.
So when you feel that rejection, like it's such great material with the person that you're there with to be like, whoa, like you said no, and I feel so rejected, but to not have it be about like fixing the rejection, but instead to be heard in that place of feeling rejected, and to see that you're actually okay and that the relationship is okay. And actually, yeah, I don't want to have sex with you, but I do want to just hold you or be held by you or whatever it is.
Right.
It's one of those yes and things. That's how saying no becomes a net positive. Because
okay, good. That's what I was wondering. So that's what you're saying, right? There's the rejection piece, which we could go on and talk about for a really long time too. And I do suggest, people working with coaches and therapists and body workers and all of that to get under that fear of someone saying no to us, because that drives so much unconscious behavior.
Yeah.
And, what you just talked about too is, right, how do you say yes and, or in this case, it would be no and, right? Yeah, I don't want to have intercourse right now, but what I do really want is this.
Yeah.
Which leads into such a realm, right, of desires that I think wouldn't otherwise either get to be expressed or feel safe to be expressed.
Yeah. And that is a co-equal responsibility. It's not that both people always show up that way, but it can be helpful if you deliver no with a no and here's what I would love instead.
Yeah.
And it's helpful if you're the one who is initiating to be ready for a no and to welcome it. To in a sense to have no be like oh goody, what else can happen then? If you can frame it for yourself that way in your mind.
Yeah. Right. That no doesn't have to be the end of everything.
Exactly. Right. It's no simply means we're going on a different adventure than the one I had planned. Right.
I think about how I created this framework in the work I do with men called ABC communication, and where A is something a man says to a woman that upsets her. And again, this is more of a heterosexual paradigm, but I think this probably could work for anyone. But I tend to work with men who date women or are in relationship with women, where A, he says something and it hurts her feelings or she doesn't like it. B is where she responds in some, usually explosive or attacking or, pushes him away way. And that's kind of the no, right? It seems like, all right, end of game. I imagine those video games game over, I've lost. But C is actually that ability to come back and connect and say, oh, wow, right? To be able to feel through, oh my God, I just got rejected. And instead of, spiraling away in that, to actually come back and say, oh, that didn't go the way I wanted it to, or I wonder what else is possible here, or wow, I love you, or I value you, and I'd like to be connected and not have it end that way, So right, that no could be more of a doorway instead of this brick wall that we run into.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you can get used to, sometimes it takes having that experience too several times. So you have that, the history to call upon, right. Okay, this has happened and not been horrible. But until then, you just have to take our word for it that it's possible.
Right.
But once you have that experience, that I think helps in terms of welcoming the no. Just like when conflict comes up in a relationship, to welcome it as this means we're about to grow. I'm excited.
I love that one.
Yeah.
Right. Not easy, not necessarily easy to take that one on, but when you do, it really shifts the dynamic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, we're talking about sex, which is one of the most highly charged places where people can get triggered, get their feelings hurt, feel vulnerable, all of that. It's we could have started with something easy,
why start easy? Let's just dive. Let's just dive.
What are you having for dinner? Where should we go to the movies tonight? That sort of thing.
Right.
But again, and this is related both to how you welcome no and also how you deal with rejection, but recognizing that part of the okayness is let's say when you hear no, it's actually okay to feel triggered in that moment, to feel all that stuff, that's normal. Where you elevate is by being like, oh, I'm having that response that Neil and Shayna were talking about. That's totally normal. And like, there's another side to this. How do I bring myself back online? How do I see like, oh, it's just that like in this moment, my safety got threatened. And so I got to just like get reminded that I'm actually safe here.
Right. Which is interesting too. We could talk about, again, this is more of a generalization, but I think as a woman in relationship, I tend to cry when that happens. And, and a lot of men don't either give themselves that option, because it seems weak or whatever the stories in the culture that so many men are raised in, that, that's not an option. So maybe we could talk a little bit about what some options are.
Yeah. Well, this is one of those places where I love work like internal family systems or inner bonding, where you recognize that so much of the emotional experience that you have in the present moment is actually a reflection of some earlier wounding.
Right. It's not actually between you and me right now in this moment.
Right. So it's a reminder of some time when I got rejected.
Yes.
And it could be, a time in high school when, with a early girlfriend or boyfriend, or it could be, a time that's not even sexual, like where, where a parent made you feel unwanted. So it's a great place to be in inquiry and to just go into like, okay, where am I feeling this sense, this emotion that I'm having? Like, where does that reside in my body? Giving a voice to that place and recognizing it as a part of you, not all of you, and being like, what are you trying to tell me right now? And what in my past does this relate to? And so often you get the images or the sounds, or you can be back in that place. Maybe this is a good place to have a little warning, that for some people that place could be a really dark place.
Yeah.
I think it's helpful if you're with a partner to let them know that's what you're doing.
I agree, right? To actually say, I just started feeling that burn of rejection, and I'm just going to take a couple minutes here, to close my eyes and feel this and notice, right, what from my past is arising, or what thoughts or what sensations. And, it's often one of the ways I think about embodiment work can be so abstract. But when something like that happens and you can say to a partner or even to someone you're dating, right, like, whoa, when you said that, I just felt this wave of fire run up through my stomach and my chest. And I don't know exactly what that is, but that's what's happening right now. So that you don't have to logically know or figure it out, but it does create a sense of, okay, I'm still connecting with you in this, versus I'm going to go back to my own cave, or I'm going to shut you out, or, which often happens if there's not a sense of, oh my God, I know how to do this with you.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're with a trusted partner and they're able to actually, if you can say like, this is coming up for me, and they're able to help be a guide through that, where are you feeling that in your body? Like all of that can be so awesome and connecting. I love what you just offered, Shayna, though, too, because, I'm imagining being on that date, and I'll admit, like, I have an agenda, which is to like foster really dynamic, conscious relating between people. And I know you have that agenda too. And I can't think of something more exciting, potentially, if you're on a date, than being like, whoa, when you said that, this was my experience. And letting that be. Yeah. And then seeing what happens from there. Yeah. Some people might get totally freaked out, and maybe those aren't the people you would ultimately want to be in a long-term
Right.
partnership with.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of what you're referring to, I think about as the levels of conversation, right? And that there's a level where we're actually responding to what's happening in the moment. And when you said this, I felt this. And it becomes really electric. There's nothing in between you and me and this moment right now that's happening. And, we all know that when your mind runs off to the future or is back in the past, and the spark fades or doesn't even get ignited in the first place. So the more we can be in the moment, and it's not that we have to be there all the time, but the more we can be in the moment, that spark tends to happen. And I've been surprised how many men have actually told me, throughout the years on dates or in relationships, that my crying has created a spark or a turn on. And I think what I want men to know in this moment too is there are ways that you could be emotional and start to fall apart and, kind of put your head in as though it's mommy's lap, right? That a woman might feel like, oh God, what is happening here? But there's also something that when you don't feel shame about having an emotional part of you, and like you said, Neil, that it's a part of you, and actually there are other, strong, powerful, great parts of me, and you can bring the emotions without the shame, then women actually have a chance to, or I don't know if saying a chance to, that might be putting it more in your court, because women have their own work to do too, right? But when you can bring it that way, I think women are more likely to feel like, wow, oh my God, this is a man who I'm starting to get to know him and I like him and I respect him, but oh my God, he's emotionally available, and, we can have this level of conversation too.
Yeah. Yeah. In IFS, internal family systems, they have this distinction of whether you're speaking from a part or for a part.
Yes. Love that.
And so that's for you listening. That's like, do you get totally subsumed by your sadness in that moment of rejection, which is what we were initially talking about, where now everything is coming from that place in you, as if you are that completely.
Right. Much more reactive and
exactly. Whereas when you are coming from a place of self, then you can speak for that part and you can be like, wow, there's a part of me that is feeling this overwhelming sadness. And wow, I just I could actually cry right now. That I think allows you to be emotional and maybe to even cry.
Right.
But to keep everyone safe at the same time.
Yeah. I love it. And it's so interesting. Of course, I think that you and I would start talking about saying no to sex and what's possible and all of this, the subtleties and the play, but also where we then are drawn is some of those deeper places of, okay, this isn't necessarily going to be easy your first time, right? It's not rainbows and butterflies of, okay, say no to sex, say no to intercourse. And now all of a sudden, you're sitting across from each other every moment of the day and your fingers are touching and all of a sudden you're zinging and orgasm and light, right? It happens more and more. And as you first start to put this into practice, there's likely going to be some older wounds or shame that can arise.
Yeah.
But I also like putting some more attention on, okay, what can we do, or what can happen, in this frame that you have of saying no to intercourse.
Yeah. Well, what you said just reminded me too of how so much, particularly in early courtship, can be around, do you want me? And it can feel also very like there's a bit of a power dynamic, like the dynamic of seduction, for instance, or I don't know. Those things were just popping into my head as like some things that may rear up. So if you're because suddenly it kind of turns the tables on maybe how you typically are used to interacting with people.
Yes, that makes sense.
So, but even that, it's like you can deliver a no, like no, or you can deliver a no, like no.
No, I still love you. I still want you.
Yeah, no. And so as much as like even no can really be playful and seductive and flirtatious, and if you're in early courtship, I think that building that tension is actually a really healthy thing.
Yeah, I agree. And it reminds me of what I think it's 7% of communication is verbal, and the other 93% is our tone of voice and our facial expressions and our beliefs that are, coloring how we say what we say. And so, right, I kind of rolled my eyes for a moment at how it always seems to go back to that in a way. And even with my 5-year-old son, this morning he was saying some things and I'm like, could we try a new tone for this one? Like, let's have a do-over. Cause I know you just told me to get that thing, but it doesn't actually feel good to me. I don't feel cared for, and I'm not here to we are in some ways as parents, but ultimately I'm not here to just do your dirty work, Right. So if we say no to someone especially who we love and we're in a loving relationship with, and we just cut off and say no, and it's kind of a harsh way, that can be really painful. And one thing I think is really helpful for people is to remember, this also reminds me of my son, it's to remember that if someone says no in that really harsh way, even though it stings out here, it's usually because they're also hurting somehow in there. And I was actually having a conversation with my son about monsters and why monsters are so mean. And one of the things I was saying was, well, people usually treat them really badly because they look funny or they look scary. And, and then they start to respond in these really loud, mean ways. And, how it's been really sweet to have follow-up conversations about that with him. And just thinking about us in relationship, I think it's one of the hardest things we can do is to be intimately connected to someone else. So, right, to remember we can take things so personally, but usually anytime someone's reactive or blaming or shaming, there's also hurt that's happening inside.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how do you bring them back or usher them back?
Question. I like that one.
Yeah. I mean, all kinds of ways that you can bring them back. But it was reminding me that a lot of, we've been focused on like the person being rejected, feeling funky or having those challenging feelings to deal with. It's actually really hard to say no too.
Right. Oh, we didn't go there yet.
Yeah. And so if you're the one, like, how do you say no in a way that handles your fear of saying no or your shame, like because you feel like you ought to be able to say yes in a particular moment.
Yeah.
This is why this whole saying no to sex can be such a reboot for a couple where things have, gotten stilted or where they've really gone off the rails as far as sex goes. Because, if you want a lot of sex, then your partner is feeling the demands of that all the time.
Right.
And if you're on the other side, if you don't want a lot of sex, then you're feeling your partner is feeling the lack probably, and you're feeling the pressure. So on either end of that, or if things have just gotten stale, it could be because you haven't found a way to really stay engaged with each other.
Yeah.
Because there's too much pain there or fear or whatever. So that's why it can be such a healthy reboot for a couple is like, oh, well, we'll just take all that pressure off.
I like that. And I've actually had some recent conversations with really powerful and also, with women who are very powerful in the world and have done a lot of therapy and transformational work. And even I sometimes have a hard time actually saying no, and it feels terrifying. It can feel terrifying. And so, it's interesting, if we just look at one situation at a time, it can feel really shitty to a man, I think, sometimes for someone to say no. But when you look at it, I think especially in the world of men and women, and again, we can go beyond gender here, but I try not to speak to something that I've not had experiences with, though as a men's coach, it's funny because I'm a woman. But right, there's this way that when a woman feels respected in her no, then, and I imagine this would be the same, but I'd like to hear your take on it, Neil, too, right? I'd imagine it could be similar for a man, that then she starts to relax and feel safer and feel more trusting, and, her heart opens, and then it makes it safer for her ultimately, whether it's now or in the future, to open her body. And I'm curious what you would say for men, how that is for men.
Well, my own experience of that would be more along the lines of, I'm afraid to say no because this could be my only chance. Like, that's the
right.
feeling that comes up. If I say no, like, will that mean that
I'll never get to have sex again?
Right. I mean, it could come across that cataclysmically,
right. But it could feel like that, even if it's well, not for another week, or not for another month, or not for right.
So from that perspective, having the freedom to say no, even when it, say, bewilders your partner, like, seriously, like, because in my dynamic, I've never been the one who wanted less sex. That's not me. I'll just be honest about that right now.
Thank you.
So it can be pretty weird for my partner to be like ready to go, and to have me be like, actually, like, right, I'm a no right now.
Mm-hmm.
And my experience of that is that in feeling free to articulate no, and like, I'm thinking back to actual experiences that I've had where the sweetness that followed was so worth the price of saying no.
Yeah.
And sometimes that does lead to actually, like, I just needed to get on the train. Right. I wasn't on the train, and sometimes it's been like, well, we don't go to, we're not on the train to London anymore, but we are on the train to, Berlin or something. So, so that's another way that amazing sweetness happens.
There's
right.
Nothing, and when I was going to say, when that all those other options are possible, and you can feel all this heat and love and connection in other ways, then it's not such a letdown either.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that's nice about no is taking the opportunity to practice saying no.
Mm-hmm.
And to understand that, like, your partner has an understanding that you are going to say no. So so they ask you something, you say no, and it can almost be funny. It's like, like the assignment for guys who have trouble asking women out on dates, to, like, go out and just get rejected. Like, to ask as many people for phone numbers as possible with the intention of being rejected.
Hearing a no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or many no's.
So it's similar to that, in that, taking the opportunity to say no and have and experience the other side of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's something worth practicing in and of itself.
It's true. It's
yeah.
true. So, okay, we could always talk for hours, and I think we could have many more useful conversations about rejection is something I want to keep covering in this podcast, and desires. I'm going to do an interview or conversation with Marsha Baczynski, who I know had on your show, about asking for what you want. So there's, and with you, there's so many more topics we could keep covering, and intimacy and connection and relationships and how to keep thriving. But on this topic, what do you want to leave men with for now?
So for now, for you listening, I would like to just leave you with the experiment, just imagining for yourself. Like now that you've heard us talk for 40 minutes about the topic of saying no, imagine what that could be like for you. And whether that's because the quest for sex has had a certain power over you, either in dating or in your relationship, or whether it's because it's something that causes terror for you, or whatever, like wherever you are in that, set a timer for like 5 minutes and just imagine what that could be like in the situation that you're in, and see where it feels freeing and see where it feels constricting. And at least that gives you more information about where you're going to go next.
A thought experiment in a way, I like to call them.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. What are the scary parts of this and what are the exciting parts of this? To then be able to start to think about how you might use this.
Exactly. How does it, and in particular, notice where it lights you up. Those are the places where I like to shine big lights, and amplify.
Yeah.
The ways in which, however it is for you, you see like, oh, this could actually be really amazing and freeing. And maybe knock it around with your friends too and see what they think.
I love it. I love it. And thank you for bringing, a counter perspective in a way. When I included sex in what was going to be talked about in this podcast, I hadn't really thought about this side of it, right? But I think these kind of experiments and putting limitations on where, supposedly there's just boundless possibility can actually be really exciting and interesting. And like you said, it opens up this whole world of subtleties that, weren't seen. It's kind of like when you're driving through a neighborhood versus all of a sudden you're walking down the street. And then you get to see the shutters on the house and the flowers and the this and the that and the neighbors, you actually get to be connected in those ways.
Yeah, that's actually the most important part. I'm so glad we didn't forget that, which is that on the flip side, when you are now saying yes to sex, but your sex is informed by this continuum of sensuality that you've been nurturing.
Yes.
Now your sex becomes mind-blowing, amazing, connected, transcendent sex that is the kind of sex that can grow and grow and grow, as opposed to the kind of sex that you get tired of.
Right. I like leaving you with that, you listening, the mind-blowing, amazing, transcendent sex, right? That's what becomes more and more possible.
Yeah.
So I will put a link to you underneath this podcast, but do you want to just quickly tell us where to find you?
Great. You can find me at neilsatin.com. You can also search for the Relationship Alive podcast. We're on iTunes and on the web and everywhere. Fantastic. And that's the best way to find me.
Awesome. Thank you for doing this today. And thank you for being a partner in this kind of, deeper exploration of how to not only make love work and connection and intimacy work, but how to have it be, like you said, extraordinary, mind-blowing, better than we ever imagined.
That's what I want for all of us. Also, I do have a free communication guide for people in relationship. It's called My Top 3 Relationship Communication Secrets. They're communication tips that are focused on improving connection, even when you're talking about challenging things. Might be really helpful if you're dealing with rejection. That's something you can get on my website, neilsatin.com/relate, or you can actually text the word relate to the number 33444 and follow the instructions there, and I'll email you a link to the guide.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope it gives you a sense of what's possible and how good your life can be. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe to Man Alive and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, videos, and raw footage I only share there. These are some of the most interesting parts of these expert conversations. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power to accelerate your career and solidify your confidence with women, because the two are related, and I know you don't have to settle for one or the other. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.